Hey there, this is Monty with Flowers by the Bunch. This afternoon I am going to put together a wreath that is a square wreath. It's actually a twig wreath instead of like a grapevine wreath. One of our followers loved this wreath. I did it several months back for a lady and asked if I could put one together for his mother, and so that's what we're going to do this afternoon. So I am just hanging it here on a wreath hanger, and I am going to make it a little differently than I've ever made one before. Instead of just starting with my greenery, I am going to put a base of some of this Deco Mesh down first, just to give us some fullness. Now my idea is to just add flowers here and maybe a touch of flowers up here. He wants me to go very neutral. He wants us to be able to, use it year round instead of for it to be a season wreath. So we're going to get started. I'm going to take my scissors, and forgive me if I'm sniffing. I have allergies so badly, so forgive me if I'm sniffing. I'm going to try not to. I'm going to take this Deco Mesh and I'm just going to cut it into short strips, and I'm going to show you what I'm going to do with it. So I watched the other night, I watch a lot of different decorators and designers, and a lot of what I've done with wreaths is just, I don't know, I've just seen different pictures and just whatever kind of comes to mind. This has never crossed my mind before. And I watched a wreath maker the other day, and she put a base of this Deco Mesh down, but she did it just kind of in little curls. And I thought it looked beautiful. And so that's why I thought we would try that. But it's not going to make a huge, it's not going to look like a mesh wreath. So I'm just going to take this Deco Mesh, and I'm just going to gather it. I think hers was a little larger than mine, and so I think hers was the wider Deco Mesh, but that's fine. It doesn't really matter. We're just going to kind of tuck these curls in. So I just kind of gathered it. I'm going to use just a piece of wire, and I'm going to kind of wire that through those twigs, and I'm going to tuck that Deco Mesh into place. So I changed stands real quick because that wasn't holding it in place very well. So we changed stands. So I'm just taking this mesh and kind of gathering it in my hand, just like that. And like I said, it's really not going to show a whole lot. It's really just for a good full base. I'm taking my wire, and this is just regular florist wire, and I'm wiring that little piece of mesh right to, so I'm just taking each of those little pieces and just wiring them right in. Now I'm going to go back and trim off this wire, so there's no worries there. I don't really like how this one's wired on, so I'm going to pull that off. I'm going to take it and just gather it in that center, just like that. Just kind of gather it in that center and just tuck that right back onto that wreath. And really, it's not going to take a whole lot of this mesh. I'm going to put another small piece there, and we're going to call that done with the mesh. But it's just going to give us a pretty base. And really, the color, I just kind of went with a neutral color so that it would blend in with my foliages. I didn't have like a solid burlap. This has like some little foil in it that's really probably in more fall tones. It's got a burgundy, a gold, and a copper, but I think it's going to work fine. Okay, so I have that mesh just wired on in several different places. I'm going to take my snips, and I'm going to remove the excess wire that is in place, that is left over from me tying them. Okay, after you get that wire snipped off and you throw that away, then we're going to start with a little bit of foliage. I'm going to show you my pretty foliage that I've chosen. Okay, so because it's going to be a year round, I just found some different greenery. I've got this pretty bush. We got, let's see, some Dusty Miller, because I think Dusty Miller really works for pretty much any time. And then I have this really pretty olive branch. And I just loved the fact that it had olives on it, so we're going to use those. Come on, little guy. Let's see if I can grab a zip tie. There we go. That's going to zip tie it into place, and then it's not going to move on us if I tie it tight. There we go. Okay, and that's not really meant for, it's not going to stay on there, but it's just going to keep us from rocking back and forth. So I'm going to start out with this little foliage here. And I'm not sure exactly what it is. It almost looks a little bit like a ruscus, an Italian ruscus. But it's pretty, it's a light green. So I just snipped all of those pieces off that one stem. And I've got my glue pan over here. So I've heated up my glue. And let me tell you that when you use a glue pan, you're going to want to heat that glue to about a honey consistency, because that means it's not going to drip so bad and it won't blister you. I'm going to take this greenery, I dipped it in that glue, and I am just going to glue it right over into that mesh. Now, this mesh is going to help this greenery stay in place. Because these twigs are not tightly woven like a grapevine, and so it's a little harder to glue things into place. But this mesh is going to give me something to glue into. So I'm just taking this greenery. I think I have a fern over here too, a pretty fern. And I am just kind of gluing that right down into that mesh. So I've got that type of foliage glued in. I also have this really pretty fern that we'll tuck a little bit of that in. It's so airy and pretty, so I thought we'd tuck a little bit of that in. Let's go ahead and use some of this Dusty Miller. So it's actually two stems that are tied together. I'm going to untie those. I'm going to trim that stem. So I'm just taking my snips and trimming that stem, dipping it in that glue. Glue that right down into place. Now the glue pan that we use here is just a regular kitchen counter skillet. And so we always heat it on low, and it works wonderful. We've had no problems with it at all. Now the reason I have such a large skillet is because several of us use it usually at the same time. And so we really like that it's large. But there are other glue pans you can buy from the hobby store. You can order them on Amazon. But I love a glue pan. To me, it's the best thing to work with when you make wreaths. Now, because this wreath is we are going to ship it, I am going to probably go back in and zip tie this foliage into place also. After I've glued it, I'm going to come back in and zip tie it into place, and it's strictly because I have such an open weave on this wreath. I just want to make sure that all of that greenery is going to stay in place for the client. Next, what we're going to do is I think we're going to make our bow and tuck our bow in and then come in with our flowers.